Tonight, as you settle into the softness of your bed, imagine the gentle hum of an ancient world, a world so distant and quiet that it almost feels like it never existed. Where are you listening from tonight? What country are you in? What city, perhaps? Take a moment to let the calmness of your surroundings sink in as we step together into a time long forgotten. In the distant reaches of time, where the fog of history wraps itself around the memories of those who once lived, there were kingdoms, not of grandeur or power, but of peace. These were the kingdoms that existed before the rush of modern life, before the clamor of the world could drown out the whispers of nature. Their streets were not filled with the noise of conflict, but with the soft sound of daily routines, the quiet rhythm of life. The old kingdoms, as they were known, were a place where time moved slowly, where every moment seemed to linger longer than it does now. The people who lived there, with their simple homes and quiet jobs, knew nothing of haste. Their lives were defined not by what they had or what they could do, but by the simplicity of their daily actions. The sun would rise, and with it, a soft light would spill over the fields and into the narrow streets. The earth, rich and damp with the morning dew, would exhale its sweet scent into the air, filling the lungs of those who wandered slowly through it. The people, with their soft steps and patient hearts, would begin their day as they always had. The baker in the village would rise early, his hands gentle as they kneaded the dough. The soft hum of the fire crackling in the hearth would be the only sound that broke the silence. Outside, the birds would sing their quiet songs, the kind that seemed to speak to something deep within. Every note was like a memory carried on the breeze, soft and unhurried. Nearby, a farmer would wake to the call of the rooster, the first rays of sunlight touching the earth and casting long shadows across the land. His fields, fertile and lush, stretched as far as the eye could see. The quiet labor of planting and tending to crops was a daily routine that never felt like work. There was a peace in the rhythm of the seasons, in the trust that the earth would always provide. The people of the old kingdoms didn't rush. There was no clock ticking away the moments, no deadlines to meet. Time flowed as gently as the river that meandered through the village, its waters moving slowly, almost lazily, as though it too were in no hurry. The days were long, filled with simple joys and quiet tasks. A woman would sit by the window, stitching a piece of cloth by the light of the fading sun. A child would play in the dirt, their laughter soft and carried by the wind. Evenings were the most peaceful time of all. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky would turn a soft purple, fading into a dark blue that seemed endless. The stars would begin to twinkle, their light distant but steady, as though they had always been there, waiting for the night to call them forth. People would gather in small groups, perhaps around a fire, where stories were told in the softest of voices. These were not grand tales of heroism or conquest, but stories of the land, of the people, and of the simple moments that made up their lives. The crackling fire would be the only sound, as soft as a sigh, as the night unfolded around them. The old kingdoms were a place where time moved slowly, and life was lived in harmony with the earth. There was no rush, no need for more than what was already present. And so, in these quiet moments, it was easy to imagine that perhaps, just perhaps, the world had always been meant to be this way, peaceful, slow, and ever so gentle. As the evening settled deeper into the land, the village grew even quieter. The last of the daylight faded, leaving behind a gentle darkness that embraced the world in a soft, soothing blanket. The air cooled with the night's arrival. a refreshing chill that carried with it the earthy scent of the fields, the fresh dampness of the night dew, and the soft whispers of the trees swaying in the breeze. Inside the homes, life continued at its own pace. The hearth fires burned warmly, casting dancing shadows against the walls, while the soft clink of utensils and dishes being washed could be heard in the background. These sounds were not hurried, not forced. They were the natural rhythm of a life lived in simplicity. In one house, an elderly man sat in a worn wooden chair, his back straight and his hands folded in his lap. The walls of his home were lined with shelves, each filled with the simple treasures of his life. Wooden carvings, woven baskets, and books filled with ancient stories. His gaze rested on the fire, his mind drifting through the quiet moments of his day. He thought back to when he was young, when his father would tell him stories of the land and the people who once lived in it. Those stories had no end, no rush to get to the next part. They were tales told with patience, each word carefully chosen, each pause holding its own meaning. It was in these moments, these slow stories, that he learned the true art of living. The village outside remained as still as ever, the faint sound of the wind rustling through the trees, and the occasional creak of the old wooden houses, the only reminders that life was still moving ever so slowly. The animals had all settled into their dens and barns, each finding their place for the night. The cows, now silent, stood in the warm light of the barn, their eyes half closed in peaceful rest. The dogs, curled up near their masters' homes, let out soft sighs as they, too, drifted into sleep. The stars in the sky shimmered gently, the kind of shimmering that seemed to speak of secrets older than time. It was as though each star had its own story to tell, stories that had been passed down for generations, tales that were not spoken but simply felt. The night, so still and infinite, seemed to hold everything the village needed, from the quiet comfort of the land to the deep, comforting embrace of the sky. As the hours passed, the peaceful rhythm of the night began to settle even further into the hearts of those who still lay awake. The simple act of breathing, slow and steady, became a reminder of how deeply connected they were to the world around them. In these quiet moments, it was as though everything had its place, and the pace of life was in perfect harmony with the earth itself. The moon, now high in the sky, bathed the land in a soft silver glow. It was a quiet light, gentle and unassuming, like the glow of an old lantern flickering in the distance. The shadows of the trees stretched long across the land, and the world seemed to pause, as if holding its breath, waiting for nothing more than the next moment to unfold. The small cottage near the edge of the village was where a woman sat by the window, her hands busy with a small task. The task itself was simple, almost meditative. She was mending a piece of cloth that had been torn during the day. Her fingers moved slowly, the rhythm of her movements calm and steady, like the ticking of a clock that had no urgency to it. Outside, the fields stretched out before her, bathed in the soft light of the moon. The land was so vast, so open, that it felt as though there was nothing else in the world but the quiet expanse of earth. The crops she had tended to for so long now stood tall and proud, their leaves shimmering in the moonlight. In that moment she realized that life in the old kingdoms had always been about connection to the land, to the people around her, and to the quiet moments that made up her days. Her gaze shifted from the fields to the distant hills, where the trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The night air was cool now, and the soft rustling of the leaves seemed to whisper, secrets only the earth could understand. The world felt vast, yet intimate, as though it was both holding her close and letting her go at the same time. As she finished her mending, she set the cloth aside and reached for her small, hand-carved wooden flute. She had never learned to play it well, but in the quiet of the night, it didn't matter. She brought the flute to her lips and blew softly, the sound a sweet, gentle note that seemed to blend seamlessly with the whisper of the wind outside. It was not a melody for a crowd, not a song for anyone but herself. It was a song for the land, for the night, and for the simple peace that came with living in such a quiet, unhurried place. The sound of the flute carried into the night, mingling with the soft murmur of the breeze. There was no rush, no urgency. The world moved at its own pace, and she moved with it. There was something deeply calming about the knowledge that there was nowhere to go, nothing to prove. Life, in all its simplicity, had everything she needed. The night continued to unfold in its serene way, and the village, with its sleepy houses and winding streets, seemed to breathe in unison. In the far distance, the gentle hum of the night could be heard, the sound of wind moving through the trees, the soft rustle of leaves, and the faintest whisper of a stream as it lazily flowed through the countryside. It was a music that did not demand attention, but instead filled the air with a quiet presence, something that seemed to belong to the earth itself. In the heart of the village, the homes stood as they always had, their stone walls thick and comforting, offering warmth against the coolness of the night. The smell of burning wood lingered in the air, a familiar scent that reminded everyone of the peaceful evenings spent by the fire, sharing stories, or simply sitting in the quiet comfort of one another's presence. One home in particular, nestled at the far end of the village, stood with its windows wide open to the night. The soft glow of a single lantern illuminated the room, casting a warm and welcoming light. Inside, a couple sat by the fire, their voices low and soft as they spoke to one another in a quiet, intimate way. Their words were not rushed, nor filled with urgency. Instead, they spoke of small things, the events of the day, the plans for tomorrow, the simple acts that made their life together so special. The woman, with her hands resting gently in her lap, smiled softly as she listened. Her partner, a man with kind eyes and hands worn from years of labor, spoke of the harvest and the changes in the seasons. There was a deep sense of connection between them, a connection that had been forged over the years through shared moments, through simple acts of kindness, and through the quiet rhythm of their lives. Their conversations were not filled with excitement, nor were they seeking anything more than a shared understanding. They simply enjoyed the company of each other, the warmth of the fire, and the knowledge that, in this moment, there was no need for anything more. The world outside may have been filled with hustle and bustle, but here, in this small home, time seemed to stretch out, like the slow, steady movement of the river as it passed through the village. As they sat together, their eyes often wandered to the window, to the night sky above them. The stars, now shining more brightly than ever, seemed to invite them to lose themselves in their vastness, and so, in the quiet stillness, they would often drift into a peaceful silence, letting their thoughts wander as the hours passed. There was no need for words when the night itself spoke so gently, when the world outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting for nothing more than the next moment to unfold. Outside, the animals were settled into their peaceful routines. The cows had long since settled in the barn, their soft breathing filling the night air. The chickens, now silent, rested in their coop, each nestled into the hay, surrounded by the familiar smells of the earth. Even the horses, with their sleek coats shining in the moonlight, stood still, as if the night had somehow cast a spell over them. urging them to rest. The winds, now gentler than before, carried with them the smell of flowers from the far meadow. These flowers, wild and free, had bloomed under the soft gaze of the sun, their petals opening slowly as the days passed. They were now quiet, their colors muted under the watchful eye of the moon. The world, it seemed, was content with its rhythm, and the animals, the earth, the very air itself, all knew their place in the slow dance of the seasons. The couple by the fire continued their conversation, their voices blending with the sound of the crackling fire and the gentle breeze that filtered in through the open window. There was no sense of hurry, no sense of urgency. The world could wait, and so could they. The simplicity of their existence, the ease with which they lived, was a testament to the peaceful nature of the old kingdoms. Here, in the quiet corners of the earth, life moved slowly, and there was beauty in the stillness, in the gentle unfolding of each moment. The man reached over and placed his hand gently on the woman's, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. They exchanged a soft glance, their eyes meeting in the quiet understanding that had been built over years of shared lives. There were no grand gestures needed here, no words of grandeur, just the soft touch of a hand, the warmth of a fire, and the shared silence of a life lived in peace. The night carried on, the hours slipping by with the gentle flow of time. And in this village, in this moment, life seemed to stretch out forever, unhurried and serene, like the soft whispers of the trees, the quiet hum of the earth, and the peaceful breath of those who lived in harmony with it all. The night continued to stretch on in its unhurried, peaceful way. The village, bathed in the soft glow of the moon, seemed to rest under a heavy blanket of silence. The air was cool now, but not too cold, just enough to remind everyone that the night had arrived, and that the world was gently slipping into the rhythm of sleep. In one of the houses at the far end of the village, an old woman sat by the fire, her knitting needles moving steadily in her hands. She had lived in this small cottage for many years, her life a quiet testament to the beauty of simplicity. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, sending a gentle warmth through the room, while the shadows danced across the walls. Her work, though simple, was important. She was making a new blanket for her granddaughter, a blanket she would one day wrap herself in as she sat by her own fire, telling stories of her grandmother's time. The old woman's hands were slow, but sure, each stitch a mark of her care, each movement a silent prayer for her family. There was no rush. There was only the soft comfort of the task at hand, and the steady rhythm of her breathing as she worked. Outside, the world was as still as it had been since the day began. The animals in the barn were at rest, their soft breathing a reminder of the peacefulness that enveloped the village. The moon, high in the sky, cast a gentle light over everything. The fields, which during the day had been vibrant with life, were now calm and quiet. The soft, dark earth stretched out before the village, the grass swaying slightly in the wind as though it too was settling into its peaceful slumber. The wind, which had picked up slightly in the early evening, had now softened, becoming a mere whisper against the trees. The leaves rustled gently in the branches, their movement as slow as the passing of time itself. It was as if the entire world was in no hurry to move, as if it had all agreed to slow down and simply be. The old woman, still working by the fire, paused for a moment, her eyes lifting to the window. Outside, she could see the silhouette of the trees against the dark sky. The stars above twinkled softly, like a quiet promise that the world was, and always would be, as it should be. It was in these moments, these slow, peaceful moments, that she found her deepest sense of peace. There was nothing more to desire, nothing more to seek. She had everything she needed right here. The cottage was small, but it was hers. The soft wooden beams of the ceiling, the warm hearth, and the simple wooden furniture were all that she needed to feel at home. The walls, adorned with small pictures and mementos of a life well lived, were a silent witness to the years that had passed. There was no clutter, no chaos, just the quiet, peaceful presence of a life lived in harmony with the world. Her thoughts drifted for a moment to the many years she had spent here, in this small cottage, in this village. She had known hard work, yes, but it was the kind of work that brought a quiet satisfaction, the kind of work that allowed her to rest at night, knowing she had done her part. The village had grown, yes, but not in the way the world outside had. It had grown in the quietest of ways, in the small changes that marked the passing of time without fanfare. The roads had been paved, the homes had been built, but the heart of the village, the slow, steady rhythm of life, had remained the same. She smiled softly to herself, her fingers working the knitting needles again as she resumed her task. The fire crackled beside her, its warmth a comfort against the coolness of the night. The world outside was quiet, peaceful, and, for the moment, that was all that mattered. There was no need to rush, no need to hurry. Everything was as it should be. As the old woman continued her work, the hours passed slowly, each minute slipping by with the gentleness of a quiet river. The wind outside became softer, the rustling of the trees less pronounced, as though even nature itself was settling into the stillness of the night. The world, as it always had, moved in its own time, slow and unhurried, and in that quiet cottage, by the soft glow of the fire, the old woman felt a deep sense of peace. There was nothing more to do, nothing more to strive for. The simple, slow rhythm of life was enough, and in that realization she found her greatest joy. As the night deepened, the world around the village seemed to grow even quieter, as though everything had agreed to pause, to hold its breath in the soft embrace of the moon. The stars above twinkled with quiet intensity, each one a silent witness to the passage of time. In the distance, the faint sound of the river continued its gentle flow, its waters lapping softly against the banks, as though telling a story that had been passed down through the ages. In the small homes scattered throughout the village, the people were now in their beds, the soft rustle of blankets, the only sound breaking the silence. Some lay awake, their minds drifting like the stars, lost in thoughts that came and went without urgency. Others slept deeply, their breaths slow and steady, in perfect rhythm with the stillness of the world around them. In one home, the young couple who had sat by the fire earlier were now tucked under, their blankets, their hands still close to each other, even in sleep. The man's arm was gently draped over the woman's shoulder, and she, in turn, rested her head against his chest, listening to the soft rhythm of his heartbeat. There was no need for words in these moments, no need for anything but the quiet comfort of being together. The world outside was distant, irrelevant in the face of their shared warmth. The sounds of the village at night were almost imperceptible. The occasional creak of a floorboard, the soft hoot of an owl in the distance, the flutter of leaves in the trees, these were the only sounds that punctuated the silence. It was as though the entire village, like the people within it, was in perfect harmony with the rhythm of the earth. Life here moved slowly, unhurried, and there was beauty in that simplicity. The woman in the cottage by the window, her knitting now set aside, had long since fallen into a deep sleep. Her face, peaceful in repose, was bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight that filtered through the window. The blanket she had been working on lay beside her, its final stitches completed, ready to be gifted. In her sleep, She dreamt of simpler times, of moments long past, of the slow pace of life she had always known. There were no dreams of grandeur, no desires for anything more. In her dreams, she was simply part of the quiet landscape, part of the gentle flow of time. Outside, the trees stood still, their branches swaying gently in the night breeze. The grass beneath them was soft, and the flowers, though they had closed their petals for the night, still released a faint fragrance into the air. The night was full of life, but that life moved slowly, deliberately, as though each moment was savored rather than rushed. The moon, high above, cast a silver glow over the landscape. Its light was not harsh, but soft and comforting, like the gentle touch of a loved one. The land seemed to glow with an ethereal beauty, bathed in a light that felt timeless, as though the world had always existed in this way, quiet and unhurried. The river, still flowing softly, continued its journey through the valley, winding its way through the landscape as it had done for centuries. Its waters were cool, their surface reflecting the light of the stars and the moon, creating a quiet mirror that stretched across the earth. The river moved without haste, as though it too understood the peace of the night, the slow rhythm of time. In the small homes of the village, the people slept soundly, each one in their own way, contributing to the quiet rhythm of life. They were part of something larger, something that had existed long before they were born, and would continue long after they were gone. The pace of life, slow and steady, was like the beat of a heart, the pulse of the earth, the gentle rise and fall of the tide. There was no rush in this village, no urgency to reach the next moment. The present was enough, and in that realization, there was a profound sense of peace. The night held everything the village needed. It held the memories of the past, the comfort of the present, and the quiet promise of the future. The hours passed quietly, and the deep stillness of the night continued to unfold like the pages of a forgotten story. The moon, now high above, cast its soft glow over the land, washing the earth in a pale silver light. The stars, scattered across the vast sky, blinked in quiet unison, like gentle whispers from a time long past. The air, cool and crisp, carried the scent of earth, grass, and the soft flowers that dotted the land. Everything was at rest, and there was no rush for anything. In the quiet of the village, there was a house where an old man sat by his window, looking out at the night. His eyes, though tired, still sparkled with a quiet wisdom, a wisdom born of years spent in the slow, rhythmic pace of life. His hands, weathered by time and work, rested lightly on the wooden cane beside him. The fire in his hearth had long since burned down to a soft glow, but he didn't mind. The warmth had seeped into his bones, and now, in the stillness of the night, he felt no need for anything more. His house was small, like all the others in the village. The walls were lined with simple furniture, chairs made from sturdy wood, a small table where he had shared many meals, and shelves filled with old books, their spines worn from years of reading. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood and dried herbs, a scent that always comforted him, a reminder of days spent in the garden, tending to the plants and flowers that grew in abundance around his home. Outside, the night was as quiet as it had been since the evening began. The animals had long settled into their places. The horses, their bodies sleek in the moonlight, stood in the barn, their soft breathing filling the air. The dogs, loyal companions to those who lived in the village, lay on their beds by the door, content and restful. The fields, which had been green and vibrant earlier in the year, were now quiet and still, the crops having been harvested. their seeds now resting in the earth. The old man sat in silence for a while, his thoughts drifting like the clouds in the sky. He thought about the years he had spent in the village, the simple days that had unfolded before him. There had been hard times, of course, times when the land had been dry and the crops had failed. But those times had passed, and now there was peace. There was always peace in the old kingdoms, even in the face of difficulty. Life here was a constant ebb and flow, like the river that wound its way through the valley. Sometimes the water would run fast, rushing in its desire to reach the sea, and at other times it would slow down, meandering in quiet contemplation. But no matter the speed, the river always knew where it was going. The old man's eyes grew heavy as the night continued to deepen. He had lived many years, each one filled with the quiet joys and small sorrows that marked a simple life. There had been births, and there had been deaths. But through it all, the world had continued its slow, steady course. The seasons had come and gone, and the land had always remained, ever patient, ever giving. He sighed softly, his breath slow and steady. The weight of the years did not burden him, for he had long ago learned that time was not something to be fought against. Time, in the old kingdoms, was simply a companion. It was a friend that moved at its own pace, and all one could do was walk alongside it, step by step, day by day. As the old man drifted off to sleep, his thoughts became softer, quieter, blending with the stillness of the night. The fire in the hearth flickered once more, casting a soft glow over the room before it, too, died down, leaving the house in complete darkness. But the darkness was not a cold thing. It was warm, enveloping, a reminder that the night was simply another part of the rhythm of life, another moment to be lived slowly and peacefully. Outside, the world continued its steady pace. The wind, gentle as always, stirred the branches of the trees. The river, as it had done for centuries, flowed quietly through the valley. The animals slept, the fields rested, and the village lay still under the watchful gaze of the stars. And so, as the hours passed, the world continued to move. But it did so without haste. There was no rush to reach the next moment, no pressure to hurry. The rhythm of life was slow, calm, and peaceful. And in that rhythm there was a quiet joy, a joy that came not from grand events or rushing toward a future, but from simply being part of the world, part of the earth, and part of the slow, steady passage of time. The night stretched on, each moment passing with the gentleness of a soft breeze that rustled the leaves of the trees outside. The stillness was so complete that it felt as though the entire village, and perhaps the world, was held in a peaceful embrace, waiting for nothing. There was no sound except for the occasional whisper of wind through the grass, the faintest ripple of water from the river, and the soft rustling of the trees as they swayed ever so gently in the night. In the small house near the edge of the village, a woman lay awake in her bed, her eyes half closed, but her mind not yet at rest. The room around her was simple, with a bed made of woven reeds and a small wooden chest at the foot of it, holding the few belongings she had. The wooden walls, weathered by years of time, seemed to breathe with the air, the silence of the room pressing gently around her. The candle by the window had long since burned out, leaving only the soft glow of the moonlight to illuminate the room in its quiet, silver embrace. She thought about her day, about the simple tasks she had completed with steady hands. She had spent the morning in the garden, tending to the vegetables that grew in neat rows outside her door. The garden was small, but it provided her with everything she needed. There were carrots and potatoes, cabbages and onions, all growing in the earth with the slow, patient care she gave them. In the afternoons she had woven baskets as she had done for many years. The wicker of the baskets felt smooth in her hands, and the rhythmic motion of weaving was calming, almost meditative. But now, lying in bed, she found her thoughts drifting. They were not filled with worry or excitement. Instead, they moved as slowly as the stars in the sky above. There was no rush to think, no urgency to arrive at any conclusion. Her mind wandered back to the days of her childhood, when her mother had sung soft lullabies to her as she drifted off to sleep. The memories were gentle, not sharp, like the quiet hum of the wind. She could almost hear her mother's voice again, soft and comforting, weaving through the room like the threads of a forgotten story. She shifted in bed, pulling the thin blanket closer around her shoulders. The night air was cool, but not uncomfortable. The warmth of the day still lingered in the earth, and it was enough to keep the chill of the night at bay. As she lay there, listening to the stillness around her, she felt a deep sense of connection to the world, as if the earth itself were cradling her gently to sleep. The room, now completely dark, was still and quiet. The only sound was the faint rustling of the leaves outside, the soft sigh of the trees as they moved in the wind. The world seemed so far away, so distant, and yet, in that moment, she felt as if she were a part of it all. Her breath, slow and steady, became a part of the rhythm of the night, a quiet heartbeat in the vast, silent world. In the distance, the faintest sound of a night bird calling could be heard, its voice so soft and distant that it seemed like a dream. The village, tucked away in its quiet corner of the world, remained untouched by the hurry of the outside world. There were no sirens, no rushing crowds, no sense of urgency. Life here moved in its own time, a time that was slow, deliberate, and peaceful. The woman's thoughts turned to the morning, to the work she would do when the sun rose. There would be more time spent in the garden, more baskets to weave, more quiet moments to savor. There was no grand plan, no need for ambition. The world she knew was enough, and that simple knowledge brought her peace. She could almost feel the earth beneath her feet, the soft, rich soil that would be waiting for her hands to touch it again. Tomorrow would be just another day, another moment to live slowly and peacefully. And so, with the soft rhythm of the night surrounding her, she drifted into sleep. Her breath slowed, her body relaxed, and her mind, now free of thoughts, joined the world in its quiet rhythm. The day was over, and the night, with its gentle embrace, held her in its peace. Outside, the world continued its steady course. The wind whispered through the trees, the river flowed softly through the valley, and the animals rested in their dens. The village, now fully asleep, remained as it had always been, quiet, peaceful, and at rest. As the night deepened further, the world outside seemed to be caught in a slow dance of time, moving at a pace so gentle that it felt almost as though nothing had changed. The stars above continued their quiet vigil, their twinkling light steady and unhurried, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The cool air, rich with the scent of pine and earth, whispered through the trees, their branches swaying softly, as though in response to an ancient rhythm that had existed long before the world had taken on the shape it had now. In one of the village homes, a man lay beneath a simple wooden beam ceiling, his eyes closed but his thoughts still awake, slowly wandering through the landscape of his life. His body was at rest, his breathing slow and even, but his mind was like the night sky, vast, filled with memories that drifted like clouds across his consciousness. He thought of the fields, the land that had always provided for him. The soil, rich and dark, had always been generous, yielding crops year after year. It was a quiet, steady kind of life that he had known since childhood. His father had worked the land before him, and his grandfather before that. There was a deep connection to the earth, to the rhythm of the seasons, that ran through his blood. He often thought that the world outside the village was a distant place, one that moved too quickly for him, too filled with noise and confusion. Here, in his small house at the edge of the village, there was only quiet, only peace. The man smiled softly to himself as he thought about his morning routine. There had been a time when the rising sun would wake him, and the chores of the day would call to him with quiet insistence. But now, even as the years had added their weight to his body, he had learned the art of slowing down, of taking his time with each task, allowing the rhythm of his movements to mirror the stillness of the world around him. In the mornings, when the light first began to creep across the sky, he would rise and make his way to the fields. The earth, cool and damp with the night's dew, would greet him, and he would walk slowly through the rows of crops, his hands running over the leaves of the plants as he checked their progress. There was no need to rush. The earth moved at its own pace, and he had learned to move with it, to trust in the slow unfolding of the seasons. Even the animals who lived alongside the villagers seemed to move in time with the world's steady rhythm. The horses in the barn would nuzzle against each other as the man passed by, their soft eyes watching him with quiet familiarity. The cows, their bodies warm from the steady heat of the barn, would rest quietly, their breathing slow and even. The chickens would cluck softly in the yard, as though speaking to each other in a language of their own, a language that needed no hurry, no urgency. The man's mind drifted now, as it often did, to the simple moments of his day. He remembered the feeling of the sun on his skin as he worked the fields, the scent of the earth and the leaves filling his senses. He thought of the quiet dinners shared with his family, the soft clink of plates, and the gentle hum of conversation. There was a comfort in those moments, a comfort that came not from the events of the day, but from the way everything seemed to fit together, as if the pieces of his life had always belonged to one another. As he lay in bed, the sounds of the village outside were almost imperceptible. The wind, so gentle now, seemed to whisper through the trees, and the occasional rustle of a small animal moving through the underbrush could be heard. The river, which flowed steadily through the valley, made a sound that was almost like a lullaby, a soft, soothing murmur that seemed to speak of time, passing in a way that was both comforting and eternal. In this quiet, in this slow passage of time, the man found his peace. There was no need for anything more. The world was full of everything he needed, and that realization filled him with a deep sense of contentment. He didn't need to chase after the next thing, the next moment. Here, in this small village, there was only the present, and the present was enough. As he let the quiet of the night wash over him, he felt his body relax, his muscles unwinding after the work of the day. His breath slowed, becoming deeper, more measured, until it was in perfect harmony with the world around him. He drifted off into sleep, his mind at ease, his heart at peace. The world continued its quiet rhythm, slow and steady as the night unfolded. The village, the land, the river, everything was as it should be, and in that peaceful certainty the man slept, knowing that tomorrow would bring more of the same, more quiet moments, more slow rhythms, and more of the simple joys that filled his life. The night carried on, serene and undisturbed, as though time itself had fallen into a gentle slumber. The world seemed to move in slow motion, every moment stretching out, unfurling like a delicate petal in the softest of breezes. In the village, the houses stood as quiet sentinels, each one filled with the peaceful rhythms of the people within. The air, cool and crisp, held a sense of timelessness, as though the land itself had always been and always would be, unchanged and constant. In one small home near the center of the village, an old couple slept peacefully in their bed, their bodies entwined in the simple comfort of the night. The room, bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight filtering through the window, seemed to hold a quiet magic. The fire that had once burned brightly in the hearth had long since been reduced to a faint warmth, and now the room was filled with nothing but the gentle breathing of the couple, the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards, and the distant murmur of the river. The man, whose white hair had thinned with age, lay on his back with his hands resting gently on his chest. His face, though marked with the lines of time, held a quiet peace, a peace that came from knowing the simple pleasures of life. He had never sought fame or fortune, never needed to prove anything. He had simply lived day by day in the rhythm of the land and the steady course of time. His thoughts, as they drifted in the quiet of the night, turned to his younger years, to the days when he had worked alongside his wife in the garden, when their hands had moved together to plant the seeds that had nourished their home. Beside him, his wife slept soundly, her chest rising and falling in a slow, even rhythm. Her face, peaceful and serene, was framed by strands of silver hair that had once been as dark as the night sky. Her hands, which had once been strong and capable, now rested gently beside her, the fingers curled softly in the comfort of sleep. She had spent a lifetime tending to the home, to the garden, and to the quiet, steady rhythm of life, and now, in her later years, she had learned to rest in the same peaceful manner in which she had lived her life. Together they had built this life, one small moment at a time. There had been hardships, of course, years when the crops had failed, times when the village had faced hardships, but through it all, they had remained steady, like the trees that grew outside their home. The world outside had often moved too quickly for them, but they had never been in a hurry. They had always known that the slow, deliberate pace of life was the only way to live. As the hours passed, the room remained silent except for the soft breathing of the couple and the faint rustle of the trees outside. The night air, cool and still, filtered through the open window, carrying with it the scent of earth and pine. The stars above, brilliant and steady, cast their light over the land, their quiet glow a reminder that time continued to pass, as it always had. The old man's mind wandered to the days when their children had been young, when their laughter had filled the house, and the garden had been full of the vibrancy of life. Those days, though distant now, were not forgotten. They were stored away in his heart, in the quiet recesses of his mind, where they would remain forever. But now, in the quiet of the night, there was no need to look back. The present, slow and peaceful, was enough. The woman beside him stirred slightly in her sleep, her hand brushing against his. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand in his fingers curling around hers with a gentleness that spoke of a lifetime of shared moments. There was no need for words between them. Their connection was deeper than that. It was in the simple touch of a hand, in the quiet presence of one another, that their love was felt most deeply. As the night wore on, the village remained as it had been, wrapped in the quiet embrace of sleep. The world, though vast, seemed small and intimate in these moments, as though everything that had ever mattered was contained within the quiet rhythms of this peaceful place. The trees whispered in the breeze, the river flowed gently through the valley, and the stars shone softly above. There was nothing more to be desired, nothing more to be sought. The world was as it should be, and so the old couple slept, their hearts at peace, their lives a quiet testament to the slow, steady course of time. They had no need for more than this: the simplicity of their shared existence, the stillness of the world around them, and the knowledge that in this moment everything was as it should be. As the early hours of the morning began to creep into the village, the night gradually softened into a tender gray, the first hints of light brushing the horizon. The stars, which had been so bright just hours ago, now faded gently, as though they, too, were preparing for the day ahead. The earth, cool from the night's rest, seemed to exhale a quiet sigh, its breath moving through the trees and across the fields. The soft rustling of leaves in the wind was like a lullaby that never truly ended, echoing the slow, steady pulse of the world. Inside the homes, the peaceful rhythm of sleep continued. In one small cottage, the woman who had fallen asleep beside her husband stirred gently. Her eyes fluttered open as the first soft rays of sunlight touched her face, and for a moment she lay still, simply savoring the quiet warmth of the morning. There was no rush to greet the day, no alarm bells or jarring noises to pull her from her slumber. The world outside was still, and so, too, was she. With a soft stretch, she sat up slowly, her body moving with the same gentle rhythm that had guided her through all the years of her life. Her gaze wandered to the window, where the soft, golden light of the morning had already begun to spread across the landscape. The fields outside were quiet, still wrapped in the early morning mist, but the faintest traces of movement could be seen. The rustle of a bird taking flight, the distant sway of grass in the breeze. She smiled softly to herself, taking in the serenity of the moment. There was something deeply comforting in the way the world moved at its own pace, unaffected by the rush of the outside world. In this village there was no hurry. Life unfolded gently, like the soft petals of a flower opening to the warmth of the sun. The stillness of the morning was like a promise that the day ahead would be filled with quiet, simple moments. The man beside her stirred slightly, his arm moving gently as if reaching for her in his sleep. She took his hand softly, her fingers brushing over the lines of his skin, tracing the familiar patterns that spoke of years spent together. There were no words needed. The touch of her hand, the slow rise and fall of their breathing, was all that was required to communicate the deep bond they shared. Their lives, though simple, had been rich in the way only slow, steady living could make them. She rose from the bed quietly, her bare feet brushing against the cool wooden floor. The house, though small, was filled with warmth. The warmth of a life lived in simplicity, the warmth of memories stored in every corner. The kitchen, where she would prepare the first meal of the day, was already filled with the comforting scent of bread baking in the oven. It was a scent that seemed to belong to the morning, to the very essence of the land. As she moved about the kitchen, her hands worked slowly, deliberately, preparing the simple meal that would nourish them both for the day ahead. Outside, the village began to wake, but even in this there was no rush. The sounds of the day unfolded gradually, like a song that was played softly and slowly, each note savoring its time before moving to the next. The clinking of a shovel against the earth, the soft hum of conversation between neighbors, the gentle clop of hooves against the dirt. All these sounds were a part of the quiet rhythm of life, sounds that spoke of nothing more than the peaceful, steady pulse of the day. The animals in the barns and fields began to stir as well. The cows, now awake, wandered slowly through the barn, their movements deliberate and unhurried. The chickens pecked gently at the ground, their feathers rustling in the soft breeze. Even the dogs, who had spent the night resting, now stretched and yawned, ready for another slow day of guarding the home. There was no urgency in the air. The world moved at its own pace, and everything had its time. The woman took a deep breath, letting the scent of the earth and the morning air fill her lungs. There was a sense of peace that came with this moment, a peace that belonged only to those who had learned to live slowly, who had come to understand the value of each passing second. There was no need for more, no desire for anything else. The day, just like the night before it, would unfold in its own time, and she would be there, moving with it, savoring every quiet moment. As the sun continued to rise, casting its golden light over the land, she turned back toward the bed where her husband still slept, his chest rising and falling gently with each breath. There was something deeply comforting in the way he looked in the morning light, the simplicity of his rest, the peace that came from a life lived in harmony with the world. She returned to his side, sitting beside him and brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. The world outside would wait, for now there was only this moment, the stillness of the morning, the quiet of the world, and the soft, steady rhythm of their life together. The village, still wrapped in the gentle embrace of morning, began to breathe more fully as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The fields, now bathed in golden light, stretched out like a quilt of green and brown. The earth seemed to hum with life, but it was a soft hum, one that blended with the breeze, with the faintest rustle of leaves, and with the steady movement of the river as it wound through the land. In the homes scattered throughout the village, the rhythms of the day unfolded. Inside one cottage, a man and woman worked side by side, their movements synchronized in a quiet harmony. The man, his hands rough from years of labor, was in the garden, his fingers gently working the soil. The woman, her hands steady and sure, prepared the meal for the day. They moved together with a sense of calm purpose, as if the pace of their actions was guided, not by the clock but by the simple flow of time itself. Outside, the birds sang their soft songs, their melodies floating on the morning air. The wind, still gentle, moved through the trees, sending waves of movement across the field of tall grass. It was as though the world was waking up slowly, stretching and yawning, not rushing but savoring each moment before moving to the next. The man in the garden paused for a moment, standing still as the soft breeze washed over him. His eyes lifted to the sky, taking in the deep blue above, now speckled with the first few clouds of the day. There was something timeless about the way the world moved here, as if nothing ever changed, as though it had always been and always would be. His thoughts drifted, not to grand ambitions or desires, but to the quiet comfort of his life. There was no need for more. Here, on the land, with his hands in the soil and the earth beneath his feet, he was exactly where he needed to be. The woman inside the house worked quietly, her hands moving with practiced ease as she chopped vegetables for the meal. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the room, a comfort that wrapped itself around her, grounding her in the simple joys of the day. She had no need for excitement, for fast-paced distractions. In the quiet of her home, with the gentle crackling of the fire in the hearth and the soft light of the morning filtering in through the windows, she felt at peace. Her thoughts, like the movements of her hands, were slow, deliberate. She thought of nothing more than the task at hand, the joy in the simple act of preparing food, of caring for the home that had sheltered her and her family for so many years. The world outside continued its steady rhythm. The chickens in the yard clucked softly as they pecked at the ground, their movements slow and methodical. The horses, now awake, moved in the barn, stretching their legs as they prepared for the day ahead. The dogs, still sleepy from their long night of rest, wandered lazily around the yard, their tails wagging gently as they checked on the familiar sights and smells of the morning. As the man in the garden returned to his work, his movements slow but steady, he noticed the subtle changes in the world around him. The air had warmed slightly, the earth now soft and pliable beneath his hands. He smiled to himself, a quiet, contented smile. The seasons moved in their own time, each day unfolding with the quiet certainty of the next. It was a peaceful rhythm, one that he had known all his life, and as the day stretched on, he felt no desire to rush it, no need to hurry to the next moment. There was no hurry here, only the gentle unfolding of the world as it always had been. Inside, the woman finished her preparations and set the table for the meal. The dishes were simple, nothing extravagant, but each one was made with care. The meal was a reflection of the life they led, quiet, steady, and full of the simple pleasures that came from living in harmony with the land. As she placed the last dish on the table, she paused for a moment, looking around the room. It was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of the meal she had prepared, with the soft light of the sun coming through the window, and with the promise of another day lived in peace. The man finished his work in the garden and returned to the house, his steps slow and easy, as though he had all the time in the world. As he entered the door, he was greeted by the smell of the meal and the sight of his wife, her face illuminated by the soft light of the room. They exchanged a quiet smile, a smile that spoke of years of shared moments, of lives lived side by side in the simple rhythm of the world. They sat down together, their meal shared in comfortable silence. There was no need for conversation. The world outside spoke enough. Its gentle whispers carried on the wind and in the rustling of the trees. In this quiet corner of the earth, there was no rush, no need for anything more than the simple joy of being together, of sharing a meal, of sharing a life. And as the day unfolded, with its soft rhythms and its quiet moments, the world seemed to settle into a gentle lull. The sun, now higher in the sky, cast its warm light over the land. The animals continued their slow, steady routines. The river flowed quietly through the valley, and in the village, life continued, unhurried and full of the simple joys of living. The day moved on slowly, with no rush to interrupt the natural rhythm of life in the village. As the sun rose higher in the sky, its warmth spread gently across the land, touching everything with a soft, golden glow. The breeze, which had been cool in the early morning, now carried a light warmth, mingling with the scent of the earth and the flowers that dotted the edges of the fields. It was a day like any other, peaceful and unhurried, unfolding in its own time. In one small house, an elderly woman woke, her body moving slowly as she sat up in bed. The room, bathed in the soft light of the early morning, was simple, filled with the quiet comforts of home. The walls, made of thick stone, seemed to hold the warmth of the day, and the small wooden bed she lay in creaked gently as she rose. She had spent many years in this home, and though it was small, it was all she needed. There was a comfort in the familiarity of it. The worn wooden beams, the crackling fire in the hearth, and the little chair beside the window, where she would sit in the evenings to watch the world outside. She stretched slowly, her bones creaking with the weight of age, but there was no hurry. There was no rush to start the day, no urgency to meet a schedule or fulfill an obligation. The village was still quiet, and she was content with that. She took her time, moving deliberately, savoring each moment. Her hands, though not as steady as they once were, still moved with care as she dressed, tying the simple linen dress she had worn for many years. She was accustomed to the simplicity of her life, and it brought her a quiet peace. The woman moved to the small window, pulling back the simple curtains to reveal the world outside. The fields stretched out before her, the crops gently swaying in the breeze. The trees, now fully in leaf, stood tall and proud, their branches reaching toward the sky. She could see the distant hills, still shaded in the soft purple light of morning, and beyond them the wide, endless sky. The sun, now fully risen, cast its light over everything, filling the world with warmth and light. It was a beautiful morning, one that she would take in at her own pace, without the need for anything more than what was before her. With a soft sigh, the woman moved away from the window and went to the small kitchen at the back of her home. She had always enjoyed cooking, the rhythmic process of preparing meals that would nourish her body and her soul. The kitchen, like the rest of her home, was simple, with a small wooden table where she would knead the dough, a cast-iron pot where she would prepare soups and stews, and shelves filled with dried herbs and jars of preserves. The scent of fresh bread baking filled the room, a comforting smell that always reminded her of the cycles of the seasons, of the steady passing of time. She worked slowly, carefully, her hands moving with the precision of a woman who had spent a lifetime preparing meals for herself and those she loved. There was no rush, no hurry to finish. The bread would rise in its own time. The stew would simmer slowly on the stove. In the quiet of her home, there was no need for anything more than the soft sound of her movements and the gentle crackle of the fire in the hearth. Outside, the village was beginning to stir, the soft sounds of footsteps on the dirt. Roads could be heard as the villagers moved from their homes, beginning the day with the same gentle pace that had marked their lives for generations. There were no noisy carriages, no rushing crowds. Instead, the village was alive with the soft sounds of everyday life, the clink of tools as farmers tended to their crops, the faint hum of a conversation as neighbors greeted one another, the gentle call of birds as they flew overhead. It was a soundscape that belonged only to this place, this time, and it was a sound that the woman had come to love. As she finished preparing the meal, the woman paused for a moment to look out the window again. The morning light had changed, becoming warmer, brighter, as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The fields before her were alive with movement now. The horses in the distance, grazing lazily, the birds flitting from tree to tree, the small animals darting in and out of the grass. Everything in the village was connected, moving at its own pace, all part of the same quiet dance of life. The woman set the table with care, placing each dish in its proper place, the warmth of the meal filling the room with a sense of comfort. She could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching from outside, her neighbor perhaps, or a friend coming to visit. It was a familiar rhythm, one that brought a sense of continuity to her life. There was no need for conversation, no need for hurry. The slow, steady unfolding of each day was enough. As she sat down to eat, the woman took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the food and the air around her. It was a simple meal, nothing extravagant, but it was exactly what she needed. There was comfort in the simplicity of it, in the act of preparing and enjoying something so basic and essential. As she ate, she thought again of the world outside, the quiet, unhurried pace of life in the village, and she felt at peace. There was no need for more than this. The world was as it should be. As the afternoon light began to deepen, painting the world outside in hues of gold and amber, the village continued its slow, peaceful existence. The steady rhythm of daily life continued, as if it were a song that had been sung for generations, a melody that did not need to change, for it was perfect in its simplicity. The elderly woman, now finished with her meal, cleaned the dishes in the small stone sink, her hands moving with ease and familiarity. There was no hurry in her movements. Every dish, Every utensil was handled with the same care and gentleness as she had done for decades. As she dried the dishes, the steady sound of the cloth against the ceramic and glass seemed to blend perfectly with the soft murmur of the world outside. Her thoughts wandered as she worked, drifting back to moments long past, when her children were small, when the house had been filled with laughter and the smells of freshly baked pies. Now, though, it was just her. Her children had long grown and left the village, each one with their own life, their own family. But this home, this quiet cottage, still held the echoes of those days. The memories were not sharp or painful, but soft and comforting, like a favorite old blanket. They were a part of her, woven into the fabric of her life, and though they were in the past, they remained with her, filling the spaces of her home. As the woman finished the last of her chores, she stood still for a moment, looking around her home. The room was neat and orderly, just as it had always been. There was a certain peace in that order, in the quiet regularity of her days. She took a deep breath, inhaling the cool, fresh air that wafted in from the open window, and felt her heart slow with contentment. There was no rush, no need for anything more than this. Outside, the wind had picked up a little, sending a soft breeze rustling through the leaves of the trees. The branches swayed gently, casting long shadows on the ground. The air, cool but not cold, carried with it the scent of earth and pine, mingled with the faint smell of the crops in the fields. The village, now fully awake, hummed with the quiet sounds of daily life, the soft voices of neighbors talking as they passed by, the sound of a cart creaking as it made its way along the dirt road, the distant murmur of the river as it flowed through the valley. All of it blended together into a peaceful symphony, a sound that felt as old as time itself. The woman made her way to the small garden at the back of her home, her feet moving steadily across the ground. The garden was small, but it was filled with the fruits of her labor. Tomatoes ripening on the vine, carrots peeking out from the soil, and the delicate herbs she had carefully planted. The plants were part of the rhythm of the seasons, growing and changing as the months passed. There was a quiet satisfaction in watching them grow, in knowing that the earth, with a little care and attention, would provide all that she needed. She knelt down beside a row of carrots, her hands working gently as she pulled them from the earth. The soil was rich and dark, warm from the sun's rays, and the carrots came out easily, their orange roots a vibrant contrast against the dark earth. She smiled softly to herself, appreciating the simplicity of the moment. There was no need to hurry. The earth was patient, and so was she. As she stood up, the woman stretched her back, feeling the quiet ache of the work in her muscles. It was the kind of ache that came not from exertion, but from the slow, steady rhythm of a day well spent. She stood still for a moment, gazing out over the garden, the fields stretching beyond it, the soft, rolling hills that framed the village. The world was at peace, and she was content. She had no desire to chase after anything more. Everything she needed was right here. The sun, now lower in the sky, cast a soft, golden light over the landscape. The colors of the world seemed to deepen, the grass turning a richer green, the flowers blooming more brightly under the fading light. The evening was drawing near, but there was no rush. Time seemed to move slowly here, as if the world had decided that there was no need to hurry. As the woman made her way back to her cottage, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had. It was simple, yes, but it was full of the quiet joys that came with living in harmony with the world around her. She didn't need the noise of the world, the fast pace of the city, the constant push for more. In this village, in this life, there was only what she needed: peace, simplicity, and a deep connection to the land. As she entered her home, the evening light streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. The fire in the hearth was still burning softly, and she added a few more logs to keep the warmth going. The house was quiet, peaceful, and she felt a deep sense of contentment settle in her heart. The world outside could move at its pace, but here, in her little home, there was no rush. There was only the soft unfolding of each moment, one after the other, slow and steady. As the evening settled deeper into the land, the light from the setting sun slowly faded, casting soft shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly over the quiet village. The last remnants of daylight were absorbed by the horizon, and in the silence that followed, the world seemed to breathe in unison. The air, now cooler, carried the promise of a peaceful night, and the village, tucked away from the rest of the world, continued its unhurried course. Inside her home, the woman moved with a calm grace, lighting the few candles that would illuminate the room as the darkness settled in. The soft flicker of the candlelight created dancing shadows on the walls, and the warmth from the fire in the hearth spread gently throughout the room. It was a comforting kind of warmth, one that wrapped itself around her like a familiar blanket. She smiled softly as she adjusted the flames, watching them flicker with a life of their own. There was a quiet rhythm to the evening that she had come to cherish. As the day wound down, the activities slowed to a gentle pace. The chores, though necessary, were not burdensome. They were simply part of the flow of life. The woman continued her evening tasks with the same steady rhythm that had defined her days. She gathered a few fresh herbs from the garden, their delicate leaves still carrying the scent of the earth, and added them to the stew that simmered on the stove. The ingredients, simple as they were, had been harvested from her own hands. There was something deeply satisfying about this, knowing that her meals were made from the land she had tended so carefully. Outside, the village was beginning to settle. The sounds of life that had marked the day were now fading into a soft quiet, replaced by the occasional murmur of an animal or the distant rustle of wind through the trees. The cows in the barn had long since settled down for the night, and the chickens, now quiet, rested in their roosts. The horses, their sleek bodies reflecting the dim light of the moon, stood still in the barn, their soft breathing filling the quiet. The village was not a place of chaos or noise. It was a place where time moved in its own way, slow and deliberate, unfolding in a peaceful rhythm that allowed for rest and reflection. There was no need for hurry, no need for distractions. Life in its simplest form was enough, and in the evenings, this simple beauty became even more apparent. The world around her was quiet, and she too was at rest. The woman finished her meal preparations and sat down by the hearth, a small wooden chair, placed close enough to feel the warmth but far enough to be comfortable. The light from the fire flickered in her eyes, casting soft shadows across her face. She took a deep breath, inhaling the comforting scent of the food she had prepared, and settled into the rhythm of the evening. There were no grand thoughts, no complicated plans. There was only the gentle act of being present, of savoring the quiet moments that filled the space around her. As the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, the stars began to appear one by one, dotting the sky with their soft, distant glow. The woman gazed out the window, her eyes tracing the familiar constellations that had always been part of the night. They were the same stars that had guided travelers long ago, the same stars that had been watched by generations before her. In their quiet brilliance, she felt a connection to the past, to the generations who had lived in the same rhythm with the land. The night was now fully upon her, and the sounds of the evening were replaced by the deeper, more peaceful quiet of the night. The soft calls of the night birds echoed through the trees, and the gentle rustling of the leaves seemed to be a lullaby that played in the background of her thoughts. The world outside was in perfect harmony with the world inside. There was no need for anything more than this, no need for anything to disturb the quiet. Her mind, now at rest, wandered back to her younger years, to the times when she had first arrived in the village. She remembered the excitement, the uncertainty, and the joy of starting a new life. But now, with the years of experience behind her, she had come to appreciate the slow unfolding of time, the simple act of living day by day, and the peace that came with it. She had learned, over the years, that the rush of the world beyond the village was not necessary. The pace of life in the village was all she needed, and it was enough. As the evening stretched on, she found herself growing drowsy, the warmth of the fire and the quiet of the night pulling her toward rest. There was no need to fight it. Sleep came easily in this world of simplicity, where the worries of the day faded away with the setting sun, leaving only peace in their wake. The soft crackling of the fire was the only sound that accompanied her as she lay down, pulling the warm blankets around her. In the stillness of the night, the woman slept deeply, her dreams as quiet as the world around her. The stars above continued their steady dance across the sky, the moon casting a soft light over the earth. The village, now fully at rest, was cradled in the gentle rhythm of time, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next day to begin, slow and steady, just as it always had. The morning slowly made its way into the village, spilling soft, golden light across the land, warming the earth from its cool night slumber. The sky, still a faint shade of blue, began to brighten as the sun stretched higher, casting long, gentle rays over the fields and the quiet streets. The trees stood tall, their branches reaching upward, as though greeting the new day. The breeze, still fresh from the night, carried the earthy scent of dew-covered grass and the faint, sweet fragrance of wildflowers. In the village, a new day was beginning, but there was no rush, no frantic rush to the next task. It unfolded as naturally as the sunrise itself, slow, gentle, and at peace. The elderly woman woke, her eyes fluttering open with the first soft rays of sunlight peeking through the window. Her body was stiff with the years, but the familiar warmth of the morning sun made her feel grounded, like the earth itself had embraced her, offering the strength she needed to rise. She stretched slowly, her limbs moving with the rhythm of a long, practiced life. Her small, simple home was filled with the morning quiet, a tranquility that had woven itself into every part of her life. The wooden beams above her head, the stone walls that had been built by hands long gone, the worn furniture that had been passed down from her ancestors, all these things seemed to hold the peace that came with time's steady flow. The room was bathed in soft, golden light, the fire in the hearth now just a flicker of embers, its warmth still lingering in the cool air. The quiet of the room was perfect, and she savored every moment before the world outside stirred to life. She pushed herself out of bed, her bare feet brushing against the cool floor as she made her way to the window. The view outside was just as it had been the day before. The rolling hills, the fields that stretched far beyond, and the forest at the edge of the village. Everything was still, untouched by the hurry of the outside world. She took a deep breath, the cool, fresh air filling her lungs, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect, untouched by time. As she made her way to the small kitchen at the back of the house, she glanced out at the garden. The vegetables she had carefully tended to for months now stood tall and strong, their leaves glistening with the morning dew. The earth, rich and dark, was a testament to the steady, slow growth that had brought them to this point. She had no need to rush. The vegetables, like the rest of the world, would grow in their own time, following the rhythm of the seasons. There was no need to push them, no need to hurry the process. Everything in nature had its own time, and she had learned to move in time with it. In the kitchen, she began the simple task of preparing her morning meal. The kettle on the stove clicked softly as it began to heat up, and the scent of fresh bread filled the air, reminding her of the simple pleasures that sustained her. She worked slowly, carefully, measuring each ingredient with the same attention she had given to everything in her life. There was no need for shortcuts, no need to rush. The act of preparing food was a meditative one that connected her to the earth, to the land she had tended for so many years. The morning light filtered through the window, casting soft, warm shadows on the stone walls. The small kitchen, though simple, was filled with the warmth of home. The smell of baking bread, the crackle of the fire, and the faint scent of herbs drying on the shelves. Each item in the room had its place, its purpose, and each day she moved through the tasks with the same quiet, steady rhythm. The world outside may have been filled with noise and haste, but here, in her home, there was only calm. She finished preparing her meal and set the table with care, placing each dish in its proper place. The breakfast was simple, just bread and cheese, perhaps with a few fresh herbs to add flavor. But to her it was enough. The joy was not in what was prepared, but in the act of preparing itself, in the quiet rhythm of the morning. There was no need for extravagance, no need for more than what was necessary. The meal, like everything else in her life, was just enough. As she sat down to eat, she looked out the window once more. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, its light now full and bright, casting a golden hue over everything it touched. The village had begun to stir, the sounds of life slowly filling the air, the hum of distant voices, the soft clinking of tools, the faint murmur of animals in the fields. These were the sounds that marked the beginning of the day. But even in these sounds there was no hurry, no rush. Everything moved at its own pace, a steady rhythm that was as old as the land itself. The woman smiled softly to herself as she took her first bite, savoring the simple, familiar taste. There was no rush to finish, no need to hurry. She ate slowly, taking in the quiet of the world around her, the soft flow of time that seemed to pass so slowly here, in this village where the earth was still, untouched by the frantic pace of the outside world. There was peace in this slowness, a peace that came from knowing that there was no need to strive, no need to push forward. The world would unfold in its own time, and she was content to let it do so. As she finished her meal, she cleaned up slowly, savoring the quiet moments that followed. The day was still young, and there was no rush to move on to the next task. She could take her time, moving with the rhythm of the day, and knowing that the world would not demand anything more from her. There was something deeply comforting in that, in the knowledge that time moved at its own pace, and all she had to do was move with it. She took a deep breath, feeling the peacefulness of the morning settle in her chest. The world outside was waiting, but for now she was content to simply be. The quiet, steady rhythm of the day continued, and with it, the steady, calm flow of time.